Hello everybody, Adrian Plus here.
Yes, and Bridget, hello.
Welcome to number 118 in Sounding the Shallows. And this is a strange time, isn't it, Bridget? Because we're actually recording this on Thursday, and we're aware that the Queen is probably very unwell, and by the time you hear this...
We have no idea what will have happened.
We have no idea what will have happened.
No.
So we're certainly bearing that in mind as we go.
Yeah. Well, one of the things already, because there's cameras outside the gates at Balmoral, and as we said, this is Thursday evening, but there isn't really any news. What they have done is come up with lots of the things that have been significant, and some of them, of course, were covered with the Platinum Jubilee, but moments when people have met her, the effect that she's had on the world, really, her consistency and the reality of who she is, not just as a monarch but as a person. And they're kind of indelible marks, really, aren't they?
It is, in a sense. She's outlived the monarchy, hasn't she? She has become somebody who has lived with us all our lives. It's really strange, and I really feel deeply about. We've talked about this before. She made promises and she kept them, and I am a great admirer of the Queen. So we'll have to wait and see what happens.
And I was thinking, Adrian, that even for people for whom this news is, it's almost not their story. Younger people who haven't. I mean, like you said, we feel she's been around all our lives, but it's still listening to the stories is going to have an impact. And you know what I was thinking about? In our house, in the cupboard under the stairs, the people who lived here before, well, I'm assuming it's them. It might have even been the people who lived here before the people who lived here before. I don't know. But there's... You know how when you're a child and your grandparents in particular want to measure how tall you are, and they put a book on your head and they make a little mark and write the date. I'm not sure people do that now.
And the name sometimes.
And the name.
What is odd about that is, this is the cupboard under our stairs, which is probably the equivalent to other people's subconscious, because it contains anything that won't go anywhere else. But
too much of anything that won't go anywhere else.
We haven't been able to bring ourselves to get rid of these markings on the wall, because there was a time when an excited child would stand against that wall.
Been told not to wiggle.
Keep very still and have a ruler put on its head, on top of its head, or a book, and then a line would be drawn, and it would be a fun thing, and it would be exciting, and it would be a memory and a mark.
Yeah.
So.
Which isn't significant to us. I think that's the point I was thinking. It doesn't have a real significance to us, but it is a reality. And her life may not have a huge significance for everyone, but they will have a moment, maybe when they met her, for some people, or what they were doing at a certain moment in her life, that becomes, therefore she becomes part of theirs.
Yeah.
I suppose what's interesting is that I was thinking those must be very positive, those marks in the wardrobe, in the cupboard rather.
Yeah. They
were positive, indelible marks that we haven't wanted to scrub out. But there are some, aren't there? Some marks that are indelible marks in our lives. And I was thinking, I don't know, as soon as I started thinking, I thought it was so many, really.
Yeah.
I mean, images of that dark, it's not our story, but that dark area in the rainforest in Brazil where the life has been burnt out in order for something else to happen. What about our experiences?
Well, I think going to Soweto was a dramatic thing, wasn't it? Because before we went to South Africa, the whole business of South Africa and apartheid and the conflict there and the years of struggle were just a concept, really. We'd never been there. We'd heard a lot about it and cared about it. But the idea that there were actually people there being it was really rather strange.
Yes, but I remember that too, Adrian. And I remember we'd actually been somewhere that was really quite nice. And because it was really quite nice, it was very difficult to... it was probably difficult in that moment to really feel what it was for the people who'd suffered for so long. And we were flying, weren't we? Flying into an area just outside Soweto. And this is what you wrote.
We've always been very naive about these things, really, haven't we? And there's nothing wrong with that. But we did go there, yeah. And this was just before the elections in the 90s. South Africa was lovely from the air. But as we spiralled to Johannesburg, we wondered why they'd left those fields of litter, left them to desecrate the landscape for so many miles around the city edge. Perhaps they didn't care. Perhaps they found it easier to blank it out than bother to recycle it or bury it beneath the ground. But is there not a likelihood, we thought, that in the end the problem will grow mountainous, the stench of foul neglect become obscene, until that mountain falls towards the city, toppling irreversibly and covering the part of town that prides itself on staying clean.
Yeah. And of course, after the elections, the townships, some of them are still there. The problems are still immense. Everything's still been very difficult.
Well, we were back, weren't we, in 95?
Well, that's when that was written, when we were there.
Oh, that's right, it was 95, yeah. And,
yeah.
I mean, people were amazed, actually, at how not easily, but how peacefully it had happened. And there's been lots of trouble. It's still a very troubled country. We know that. But,
so that image was... this indelible, if we go with this, I mean, there were positives and negatives, Adrian, because I remember one thing as we drove through Soweto, and it was so awful. And anybody who has visited a township or a slum in in some parts of the world will know that the image, it's so harsh. And yet, if you do remember, we saw children walking to school, and the thing that struck me was that their socks were clean, girls with white socks. And I thought, how can these people survive and overcome something that is so dark and so difficult?
All over the world, haven't
everywhere.
Parents really working very hard to give their... If we're talking about our travels, then what about Bangladesh and that extraordinary wall?
Right.
The anti-flood wall, or the protection wall.
Yes. I mean, that was an area that had been hit by cyclones again and again and again and again and again. Again, totally out of our experience, but again, something that really, really impacted us. If I can, I'll try and read a little bit. Sorry, I said we were in our shed. The light isn't the best down here. But I'll have a go. Over the past 180 years, there have been no less than 200 cyclones, 200, 6 of which proved so severe that over 50 million people lost their lives. Looking down through flourishing palm trees to mile upon mile of green sunny fields, it was almost impossible to believe that in 1991, a freak combination of weather conditions had produced the worst cyclone this coastal area had ever seen, quite literally wiping out everything in its path. And it had churned up the sea's surface so violently that it was followed by a tidal surge 15 feet high. And we heard, didn't we? We heard story after story of people who'd clung on, and we saw marks on the walls, 15 feet high, indelible images of something absolutely devastating in people's lives. We stood on top of the
wall, didn't we? And we saw an enormous lump of concrete,
yes,
which we were told had actually kind of flown through the air. I
yes.
mean, brought up by this massive tide.
Yes. Yeah.
And the idea of people cowering behind this wall, waiting for it to end,
Yeah.
or hoping that it would end.
I'd love us to
extraordinary.
talk a bit more about that another time, Adrian, because there was something about the way that was constructed and the way people determinedly worked out how to survive that impacted us, I think, for years, really.
Yeah. I had a very emotional experience this week because it's a bit odd, really. We, as some people know, we worked with children in care for years, or in all sorts of circumstances, actually, between us. And I wrote a book, one of the first books I wrote, wasn't it, in the beginning, called Broken Windows, Broken Lives. And it's
fiction, but it's so closely based on...
It's based on what actually happened.
Apart from the fact that we both went to work with these children together,
did.
and in the story, she decides to join him at the end of the book, which was quite convenient for the writing of the book.
But it was meant to be rather like the Harriet things, I suppose. But the stories were true, and the children were very close to the children we knew. But I tried to read it, and it's such a long time since I read it that it hit me like a punch in the gut. And I just wept over the first 2-3 chapters. I couldn't contain the emotion in me. Remembering the shock of discovering that there are kids who have such terrible beginnings and are dealing with such awful problems, and that there were ways of dealing with them that we would never have imagined. And I couldn't carry on reading, but I suppose it also reminded me, talking about indelible marks, that there was some reason, certainly for me, for working with people who are broken inside. And it's a little hackneyed to say it, but I think part of it was because I was partly broken inside, I suppose. But we have always worked, we've always wanted to be there for people who are broken. And that's, for me, that's why my favourite picture is a picture of a broken down car in a field.
Think you talked about that before.
I did talk about it, yeah. So
its only significance, or one of them, being that somebody had painted it, but also the other significance being that the person who painted it was agoraphobic.
That's right, yeah.
And so the fact that the car has all its doors flung open always meant a lot to you, didn't it?
But the indelible mark is that there is a lot of suffering.
Yes.
And once you've seen it, as we did abroad and as we've encountered it here in England, Great Britain, you can't really turn away from it very much.
Well, no. I mean, what I was thinking when you told me, Adrian, how reading this book, and in fact, I'm going to tell you what happened. We haven't got a copy of this book anymore, and I saw on the Amazon that there was one remaining book for 25p, a second-hand one, so I sent for it because I thought it would be nice to read it again. I had no idea that it would produce this emotion in you because it's so long ago. But I think these marks are so deep inside, these things that have happened are so deep inside that one doesn't live with them all the time, but there they are. And obviously what happened for you was reading this book. It just brought them all back.
It was like a cork coming out of a bottle. It was most extraordinary. And we've had stuff going on for a while and you deal with emotion by letting it out. I deal with it by pushing it back in. And I think it just, with the memories, released a lot of other stuff as well. A lot of feelings that have been a bit trapped for a while.
I mean, I remember part of you was relieved to leave that job because it had been so hard. And sometimes one doesn't always remember the positive, significant marks that something has made until afterwards. I don't know. I mean, obviously, we don't have our parents around anymore. We hear from quite a lot of people for whom their relationship with their parents was one of the most significant things in their lives. And they're things that you don't always realise until after you don't have them anymore. That they're part of you. They were marks made in you. I tell you a funny one. If you remember, my mother always used to say when we got home, would we give her 3 rings? Well, at the time, when we'd been to visit, and at the time I thought this was pretty silly, really, because we were travelling all over the world. But when we travelled from Norwich to Hailsham, we had to remember to do 3 rings. And she would do the same if they'd been anywhere when they got back. You didn't want to waste money on the phone. You did 3 rings. And when she died, and we'd prayed together and her... But even so, when she died, a great gap opened up in me, and I thought, I wish she could give me 3 rings when she got to heaven, just to let me know she got there safely.
It is strange becoming an orphan, isn't it?
Well, I think...
We are both orphans now.
Well, I think we are, and so are most people of our age, but I was talking to somebody not that long ago who had lost both her parents and suddenly said, I'm an orphan. And she was in her 40s.
Yeah.
And it is, yes, it does impact you.
Yeah. But some indelible things are not positive. We're not just talking about...
No, we're not just talking about toddlers' graffiti. They always seem to manage to use an indelible pen when deciding to draw on the wall.
No.
I mean, they might have all sorts of ones you can wipe out, but for some reason, the one that they actually draw with is the one that doesn't.
It is strange, that, isn't it?
Yes. It's like marks on the carpet, and you have universal cleaners, and the one thing you appear to have dropped on your carpet is the one thing that defies
there is also
all cleaning materials.
An inexpressibly pungent relationship between a new carpet and the first glass of red wine that you drop on it.
Yes.
And it's almost a relief. To get the water, the white wine, the sugar, the salt, the baking powder, the flour, and make a pudding and put it on the mark, and then it doesn't anyway. And obviously, we've, in our time with working with people in all sorts of situations, we come across stuff from the past that certainly leaves a mark. And another thing I wrote ages ago, which is just called When I Was Small, and some of the templates from childhood can be really difficult to shift, can't they?
Yeah.
This is just called When I Was Small. When I was small, I didn't know the world had fallen long ago. I stumbled often, fell from trees, enjoyed the pride of bloodied knees, and banks were made for rolling down or sliding when the snow had come. My bones would bend more easily. Even when they broke, they mended soon. And people gave me things to cheer me up. I once went sledging with a friend at night. He didn't trust the moon, and he was right. It slipped away as we began our ride, but I was glad I loved the dark. For all I cared, we could have sledged into eternity. I wished that pale, hissing dream would never end. It did. I have the scars. I still have all the scars from all the falls, and mainly on my knees. But somewhere deep inside, where no one ever sees, I have some other scars that never do completely seem to heal. The cause of them I cannot now recall, but then I didn't know the world had fallen long ago, when I was small.
Yeah, it really churns me up when I think of how you felt as a child, but then we meet so many people, and I think it may be when they were adults that they were hurt, or it may be when they did something that they wish they hadn't done. And these marks, it's so hard to believe. Is there a word? Indelible? I don't know there is. Indelible. Well, I don't know. I mean, that they are removable. I know once you talked about negative graffiti scratched in your heart. And I think those indelible marks, I mean, we know it in theory that they can be wiped out. We know in theory they can be cleaned up. We know that that's because Jesus told us so, and because God told the Israelites so, and because Paul told the new Christians so. But somehow you can believe it for everybody else, but you can't always believe it for yourself, can you? That these marks are wipeable, awayable. That'll do instead of delible. I don't think there is such a word.
Delible, that sounds like something from Only Fools and Horses.
No, that's Del Boy. No, don't.
No, I know. It is true. The plain fact is, it is not easily wiped away for lots of people, whatever anybody says. And a lot of people we've known have their hearts have been scrawled over very negatively by things that have happened to them, and it's a lifetime's work or more, I might add, for that to be mended. And I'm not saying hearts don't get mended, but sometimes the pain, and there'll be people listening to this knowing this, it's more like a knife that actually cuts into your heart and makes it very difficult for God to write on it. I mean, the Bible says somewhere he will write his law on your hearts.
Yes,
well, that's okay if there's some room left.
Yes.
But if it's so cut up that you can't get it on there, it's a long old job. And we do need to understand that.
We do. But I think coming back to the Queen, oh my goodness, we don't know. We won't know the news till tomorrow, maybe the next day. We know it's not good. But coming back to her life has been so public. Her family's joys and sorrows and guilt and failure and success, and they've all been so public. But in the middle of it, she has not actually been. She may have felt scarred. We know there was 1 year, wasn't there, in her Queen's address? Yes, that she obviously has been desperately hurt and terribly unhappy and quite confused sometimes and all the rest of it. But that, like the marks in the cupboard, they're like marks in the cupboard. They are significant moments in her life. But the important thing is that her faith has remained. Yeah, I think it has. And that she is, in the very real sense, totally safe, whatever happens over the next few days or weeks.
Well, all we can do is wish her peace, whatever happens.
And her family.
Yeah. Anyway, so we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.